The Dave LewAllen Podcast is sponsored by Sherm's Candy, a Michigan-based company that specializes in awesome tasting candy that's in the shape of Michigan. And welcome again to the Dave LewAllen Podcast. We cover sports stories, newsmakers, and difference makers in our community and across the state of Michigan. So pleased for you to join us today for a discussion about a very timely matter in the news today and in government and in politics, and that is tariffs instituted by the Trump administration. Micheline Maynard, Micki Maynard, our friend, is my guest today on the Dave LewAllen Podcast. She is a journalist, author, educator, has written 5 books, one very important book on the auto industry as well. From 2003, The End of Detroit, How the Big Three Lost Its Grip on the American Car Market. There's been a PDF sequel to that. And now, Micki Maynard is on Substack as well, talking about all things movement. Micki, welcome, and thank you for the time today to delve into this topic.
Well, it's been taking up a lot of my time trying to figure out what we're going to have in terms of tariffs and what they're going to mean to Detroit and the rest of the automobile industry. It's literally something I'm checking several times a day when I go into the Google News site. I have a little topic set aside for tariffs, and I'm on there all the time.
Well, you have keen insight into the auto industry for sure, and really want to focus this discussion on the impact on the auto industry, automakers, suppliers, auto dealers, because if these tariffs are instituted and hold, tariff is tax, right? I mean, when you get right down to it, a tariff is a tax, and we as consumers are going to be impacted and pay more, aren't we?
Yes, and I'm already hearing evidence that used car prices are going up. And there are tariffs on used car prices. We've already sold the car and been resold. But when prices go up in the new car market, that will raise prices in the used car market. And of course, dealers, as we know, are independent business people, and the car companies can pledge not to raise prices, but that doesn't keep the dealers from adding, say, an import surcharge or just adjusting the prices of used cars because they're not set. There's nothing that says, if you charged $20,000 last week, you can't charge $21,000 this week. It's all up to what the consumer will pay for.
And depending on what your view might be of this administration versus the last administration, I mean, what has happened in the early months of the Trump administration? By all accounts, it's chaos to a large degree, and with the tariffs, I mean, it isn't something that we'll roll this out in 6 months or 9 months or a year. I mean, it's like April 2nd, this is going to happen, and then there's a pause, and some industries maybe are going to be excluded or limited in some ways. But how do you run a business? How do you plan a business with all this turmoil happening?
So you have to remember that the auto industry was already in some turmoil
Yeah.
because of electric vehicles. So we've been kind of ramping up for the arrival of electric vehicles. And last year, the automakers sold 1.1 million, which is the most in their history. And everyone was saying, okay, well, the next few years will be turbulent because we'll be moving over to more hybrids and more electric vehicles. And then along come tariffs. And I honestly really have a lot of sympathy for the finance staffs at the car companies here in Detroit and elsewhere trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to spend? What can we allocate? Which programs can we delay? Is there anything that we don't have to do this minute because we may need that extra cushion in order to afford what happens with the tariffs? And I think, to be sure, President Trump had talked about tariffs as a tool during the campaign. But there are so many other issues going on in the campaign that I'm not sure that tariffs at the time got the attention that they probably should have gotten. And I'm just amazed this is one of the first things that he did coming out of the chute, getting skating right onto the ice. It seemed like there were other issues that needed to be addressed more than tariffs, but here we are. It's April 2025, and we're literally seeing tariff chaos.
And auto manufacturing is such an important part of our economy. And look, from President Trump's standpoint, he wants to bring more manufacturing back here. I mean, so if this is, a hammer to try to do that, to force, production back in this country, but, we have a global economy. I mean, we've got, parts makers and assemblies and I mean around the world, and these parts that are made elsewhere are in our cars that are, Detroit 3 cars. I mean, it's complicated.
It's very complicated, and one of the things I'd like to do is to share a little history lesson
Please.
about protectionism. So, back in the 80s, there was what was called the Voluntary Restraint Agreement. And at that time, Japanese car makers were really picking up sales in America with cars built in Japan. And so the Reagan administration reached a voluntary agreement with Japan that said you are limited to a ceiling of 2 million vehicles per year imports. And if you want to sell any more in the United States, you will have to build them in the United States. It was very clearly stated that that was the goal. What everyone thought would happen would be that the Japanese automakers would come to America, that they would hire workers, and the UAW would represent those workers. And that was definitely an expectation. And instead, the new car makers, import car makers, were able to pick their spots. And they went to they sort of started at Columbus and went south from there. So they deliberately picked states that were right to work states where you don't have to join a union. They deliberately interviewed workers. A lot of people up here in Detroit, they have dads and grandfathers and uncles who had helped them get a job in a car plant. Down there, you had to be interviewed, and people lined up out the door for these jobs. And so the car makers were able to open this network of factories stretching from Texas all the way over to the Carolinas and up to Indiana and Ohio. And except for the Volkswagen plant, which recently voted to unionize, none of them are union. So it defeated the UAW strategy of organizing all these factories. So let's fast forward 40 years. Instead of anything like a voluntary restraint agreement, Trump has used tariffs, which essentially are a tax. And so there's 25% tax on all vehicles coming to the United States from outside the country. That means about half of what Toyota sells in the United States still comes from Japan. A big chunk of what BMW and Mercedes sell come from Germany and Europe and other factories. There are even some vehicles that are built in China that are coming over to the United States. And in fact, those will probably have higher tariffs because we have these huge tariffs on China. And if the goal is to get people to move production to the United States, that's a long-term thing. So if you think about VRA, that was 1982.
Right.
It took Toyota to 1985 to break ground, and then they didn't start building cars until 1986. And they didn't start building a car for America, the American Camry, until 1992. So these are decisions that they're very well considered decisions. This is not the kind of thing you decide in a week or two and then say, okay, go find me a plant site. Let's do the groundbreaking and start putting up the steel. Just doesn't work that way.
Right. And you're talking about with the Detroit 3, I mean, Hey, they got Wall Street to worry about. They've got investors. They've got quarterly, projections to meet, yearly projections to meet. I mean, this has to be a huge stress on the system.
I think what a lot of people are deciding to do is just wait because it's changing so rapidly. So you have had let's just talk about Mexico and Canada for a second, because that was where the Trump administration went first. And those tariffs were announced and then they were delayed and then they were put back on. And we're starting to hear rumblings that with these auto tariffs that there might be some either car makers or countries or whatever exempt. So everybody should stay tuned to whatever the latest tariff news is on that. But the putting aside automobiles for a second, there are also tariffs on parts. And you can't build an engine plant tomorrow and replace engine parts coming from outside the United States that fast.
Yeah.
It just is not going to happen. And I think that's what is starting to sink in, is that this might be a theoretical policy, but in practical terms, it's just going to take a while.
If it's a matter of a threat, I'm a tough guy and this is what I want to see happen and
Mhm.
therefore this is the leverage that I'm going to use, but maybe it's in large part just to bring people in to negotiate and make a better deal for America. But in the meantime, look at the chaos that has resulted.
So I think that a lot of people, and myself included, said when all this started that this was a negotiating tactic, that Trump is all about the art of the deal, and he likes to negotiate, and he likes to bring people to the table, and he likes to see, what kind of deals he can get. And so if I'm an executive at one of the Detroit companies or elsewhere, I am I might be paying lip service, but I would also be waiting to make serious decisions because it could all change tomorrow. It could all change next week. By June, they may have moved on to something else. And it's one quarter. So think about it that way. We're in the second quarter for the car makers. And as you mentioned, they're very focused on Wall Street and quarterly results. So it's possible that they could have one bad quarter, but they could still make it up later in the year.
And look, I mean, from a consumer standpoint, prices of new vehicles are already so high. And if tariffs are in place and, prices increase even further, I mean, who can afford these vehicles?
Well, I was actually thinking about buying something new myself. I have a car from 2015, so it's 10 years old this year, and I've been trying to do some math on what I can afford, but now I don't think I can do anything. And if I do anything, it will be to buy a used vehicle. And of course, I'm a little distressed to hear that the prices of used vehicles might be going up. And the other thing people have to remember is that at a certain point, body shops don't want to work on your car after about 10 years.
Hmm.
And so a lot of us are trying to make this calculation. I'd like to keep my car going, and I certainly could mechanically. But if I run into, a curb or a tree or something, I might have to search for a body shop that would be willing to fix it. And so it's sort of that personal calculation, financial calculation, and I can imagine if a lot of people feel stuck right now.
Indeed. We'll pause the conversation for just a moment. Micheline Maynard, Micki Maynard, journalist, author, educator, joining us on this episode of the Dave LewAllen Podcast as we talk tariffs with particular emphasis on the auto industry, so important to Detroit and the state of Michigan and the Midwest. But I want to tell you about our sponsor, Sherm's Candy. Have a sweet tooth and a love for Michigan? Well, Sherm's Candy is the perfect place to satisfy both. Sherm's specializes in delicious candies, all shaped like the Mitten State itself. Choose from classic Michigummies for a delightful taste of gummy goodness, or if you're looking for a richer flavor experience, indulge in decadent chocolate Michigummies. And for those who prefer a tart and tangy treat, pucker up for sour Misha gummies. Sherm's Candy doesn't forget about your furry friends either. They offer Misha Pups, a tasty treat made just for dogs. Many fine retailers across Michigan carry Sherm's Candy, or you can order online at shermscandy.com. That's Sherm's, SHURMS candy.com. Talking with Micki Maynard on this episode of the Dave LewAllen Podcast about tariffs. So you mentioned about, your decision consideration as it relates to a new vehicle or purchasing of a used vehicle. What do you think the rest of us are thinking as we try to process everything that we're hearing? And how about dealers? I mean, are they seeing an influx of people coming in because they're worried about what might happen? I mean, what's your sense of the market, if you will?
So, according to the sales figures that we saw for the first quarter, there was a bump in sales in March. People were going to dealerships who were in the market already to get their vehicle before the tariffs kicked in. I think we're going to see a couple things. I think, first of all, we will see import fees, however the dealers want to describe them, because they're not only going to pay more for vehicles built outside the United States, they're going to pay more for parts. And they don't have, I mean, they can maybe control the price of the vehicle increase. And I think Toyota is asking its dealers not to raise prices, but we'll see how that goes. But when parts go up, if you need the part, you have to pay for the part. I mean, you call your supplier and the supplier says, okay, well, now that piece costs me 25% more or way more than that if it's coming from China. And if you want to do the service on that vehicle, you have to pay for it. And then I don't think anybody's going to eat those increases. And they're business people. You just stay in business. You have to make a healthy profit so you can pay your employees. And so I think we'll probably feel it first in repair shops, in either the dealership repairs or independent service places that you go to. And then we'll start to see it as more vehicles come in from outside the US. Then we'll start to see it on vehicles sold here. But I noticed that Jaguar and I think Nissan have both said they're pausing deliveries to the United States. And maybe what'll happen with those labels is that they'll try to sell down what's on the showroom lots. And then when the new vehicles, if they decide to send new vehicles to the US, then those will have the adjusted prices. And I think it's honestly, I don't think dealers should be marking up inventory that's been sitting there. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's a good business practice. However, if they're placing orders and the vehicle prices are going up at the dock, then they pretty much have to pass on some of that increase to their customers.
But if there aren't exemptions, or if the tariff figure isn't reduced, what have you, I mean, General Motors, I mean, they're assembling a lot of vehicles in Mexico, and then they're coming, to this country. I mean, that's gonna have an impact.
So Mexico and Canada, I feel badly for both those countries.
Yeah.
Especially Canada, because members of my family came to America through Canada. I think that, first of all, Canada's having an election.
Yeah.
Canada has a parliamentary election at the end of the month, I think next week. And this has really upended their election campaigns. And before the election campaign, it looked like the Liberals in Canada were not going to get reelected. And Mark Carney, who is now the head of the Liberal Party, has basically said, elbows up. If the U.S. won't deal with us, we'll deal with the rest of the world. And so you have vehicles built in Canada that now have this 25% tariff, and vehicles built in Mexico that have a 25% tariff. And it'll be very interesting. We had what was called the Auto Pact, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, or USMCA, whatever acronym you want to use. And we've had agreements with Mexico and Canada for 40 some years.
And didn't Trump negotiate some of those deals, or renegotiate? Yeah.
Yeah, the most recent one in
Yeah.
2018 was negotiated by him. And so this isn't just a, oh, we haven't had any tariffs and now we'll have tariffs. There have been very specifically stated regulations in those pacts, in those agreements. And so he's basically taken a sledgehammer to something that he negotiated.
Yeah.
And that I'm flummoxed by that. That's the one that surprises me the most.
Well, and that can't please your trading partners, your friends, right? Canada and Mexico in particular, given proximity to our country. Yeah, that's got to be like a shot to the heart.
Yeah, and also a lot of these, for example, General Motors has been in Canada since 1924. Most of the car plants that have been in Mexico were built in the last 40 years or so, 30 to 40 years. These are long-standing relationships, and these are very developed industries. If you go to Canada, there are parts makers all across Ontario. There are parts makers all across sort of northern Mexico. And so you had whole infrastructures that built up around, it's not like just one or two assembly plants. You have the whole parts industry too. And a lot of the vehicles built in the United States that are, American made vehicles in quotation marks, they have parts from Canada and Mexico. And so nobody really escapes this. And even Tesla, which claims to have the highest amount of US source parts, it still gets parts from other parts of the world. And so even Tesla, even with Elon Musk at Trump's right hand in the White House, they aren't going to escape either.
Um, the EV question as well, when we talk about challenges for automakers, I mean, they've been all in through the Biden administration with the push for EVs, all EV, what have you, hybrid EV. I mean, and now, Trump comes in and he was looking to remove, right, you know, uh, government help for EVs, and so there's that on top of the whole tariff thing. I mean, your head, if you're an auto executive, with a manufacturer, your head's spinning, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and I've written quite a lot about EVs and especially the EV battery
Yeah.
part of it. So, what a lot of people don't understand is that for economic development, these EV battery plants were a big deal. There's been something like $100 million of investment in EV battery plants across the country. And they were supposed to employ 50,000 people, and that would be making batteries for both hybrids and EVs. And a great example here in Michigan is the Blue Oval plant in Marshall. And I actually took a drive over there last summer because I was very interested in seeing what it was going to be like. And when the plant was announced, it was supposed to open next year, and it was supposed to employ 2,500 people. And lately, the state of Michigan essentially said if you're going to get these incentives, you have to open by 2028 and you have to employ a minimum of 1,700 people.
Mm.
And so the construction was continuing at Blue Oval, but the timeline has been pushed back on that plant. And so there are EV factories essentially way up and down I-75 and then across on 40. And the biggest one is in North Carolina, which is what Toyota is building. And that is supposed to provide batteries for all the hybrids built in North America by Toyota, and then eventually electric vehicles when Toyota gets going on EVs. But now you have to wonder, if you don't have the federal guidelines and support, if you don't have the charger network, because apparently the work on the federal charger network has been delayed now. What do you do with all that? Are we going to see massive write-offs for all of this investment the way we've seen some write-offs for the car companies in China? And, that's not good. You don't want to dedicate resources to something that's not going to happen because it takes resources away from something that you actually might be able to sell.
Right. And frankly, the acceptance of EV by the motoring public still is not at a point where maybe the automakers would like it to be either.
So we sold 1.1
Yeah.
million in the United States last year, and until and Tesla. So it was very interesting. I mean, I'm just watching Tesla kind of implode, and I feel sorry for the dealers and the people
Yeah.
who work in those Tesla dealerships because, first of all, they're targets of demonstrations against the Trump administration. Second, anytime someone's standing in your driveway, it makes it harder for someone to come in and buy a car. And Tesla had 80% of the EV market in the United States just a few years ago, and now they have about 50% of it. And essentially, if you don't like what Elon Musk is doing, that might turn you against an EV in general. And I think a lot of the other EV companies are trying very hard to say, hey, consider us, consider Rivian. The Detroit companies are still developing their EVs. Toyota's developing EVs. There's Honda. And it's the market has all these headwinds that it didn't expect to have even 3 or 4 months ago.
Micki Maynard is my guest on this episode of the Dave LewAllen Podcast. She's a journalist, author, educator, has taught at a number of universities across this country, author of 5 books, and also has worked with and for the New York Times, Washington Post, doing work for Boston Globe, Time Magazine. She is seemingly everywhere, and we're glad she's here with us today. And we're going to continue the conversation after we tell you once more about our sponsor on the Dave LewAllen Podcast, Sherm's Candy. If you have a sweet tooth, Sherm's Candy is the perfect place for you to go. Sherm's Candy specializes in delicious candies, all shaped like the Mitten State itself. Misha Gummies for a delightful taste of gummy goodness, a richer flavor if you're looking for that. Decadent chocolate Misha Gummies. And for those who prefer a tart and tangy treat, sour Misha Gummies is the choice for you. Sherm's Candy also has a treat for furry friends, Misha Pups, a tasty treat made just for dogs. Many fine retailers across the state of Michigan carry Sherm's Candy. You can also order online at shermscandy.com. Talking tariffs and with the particular impact on the auto industry with Micki Maynard. And we're going to let you know shortly how you can connect more with her great work as well. But, we talk about EVs, and we talk about the future of the auto industry and the challenges ahead. As you look into your crystal ball, what does the future look like for the rest of this year and beyond, if you'll do that for us?
So this is so interesting that you're mentioning how people can follow my work. I'm actually writing a white paper about this, and it'll be available to paid subscribers of my Substack newsletter, which is called Intersection Everything That Moves. So I'm starting to put together some bullet points on what to share with people about the future of the industry. And I'm looking at several things. I mean, the tariff chaos is short term. I don't think this is going to be a long-term thing. And if it is, then we have to adjust everything that we assume. But one of the things I'm looking at very closely is demographics. So you have to figure that for the last 40 years or so, the baby boom generation, my brother's generation, has been fueling the car market. And certainly boomers are still going to buy some cars, because it's a big generation. It's 1946 to 1964. So people are still buying cars. But a lot of people have condensed their household fleets. They've gone from 2 cars to 1. I mean, I know people who are now retiring and moving to new parts of the country and deciding they can make do with 1 car and then public transportation or bicycles. My brother is a very avid cyclist around Novi, so wave at him if you see him. But the boomers, that big bubble of car sales is now going to kind of winnow down a little bit. And Generation X and the millennials and Gen Z are not buying cars at the rate I should say cars, trucks, and SUVs, the whole thing.
Right.
They're not buying at the rate that the boomers bought. They are willing to consider used cars more than the boomers were because cars are so expensive. The average vehicle is now $48,000, and I'm sure that tariffs are going to bump that up over 50. And the rule of thumb used to be that you had to get earn 2.5 times your annual income in the car price. So if it's $50,000, that means somebody has to make $125,000 to really afford that new vehicle. And loans are stretching out for 5 and 6 and 7 and even 8 years. And so you've got basically lower demographics, a smaller group of people who are going to buy vehicles getting more costly. Now, the flip side of that is that vehicles are built better than they ever were, which means that you can keep them longer. So, yes, I drive a 10-year-old car, but my 10-year-old car is fine. I mean, nothing's wrong with it. I mean, I would love to have a new car. I'd love to have a few of the gizmos that are on new cars, but I'm fine. So you've got everybody kind of reassessing where automobiles fit into their lives, and you've got these external factors like bike lanes and public transportation. And we don't feel that as much in Detroit as people do in other parts of the country. But I went to hear Dan Gilbert speak at the Economic Club of Detroit, and he's a real advocate for regional transportation. And he's basically saying, I bring in, 150 interns every year. And the first thing that they say to me is, how are we going to get to work? We can bike to work, but we wish that there was better public transportation for Detroit. And cities all over the country are working on their public transportation systems. So I think the next 20 years or so for the auto industry are going to be different, definitely, than the previous 20 or 40 years. So that's a couple things. And then a couple of other things to look at is clearly, how are people feeling about buy American versus buying import nameplates? And the last numbers I saw showed that Detroit is well below 50% of the market. And, Toyota is, I think, number 2. It's General Motors, Toyota, and Ford. And Stellantis is down with a bunch of other brands. So you're going to have a car market a lot more like Europe, where you just have smaller market shares and nobody dominates the market the way they once did even 10 or 15 years ago.
One thing I've noticed from Ford, they have kind of ramped up a marketing campaign stressing, the percentage of their vehicles that are made in the U.S. higher than any other of the domestic automakers for sure, and seem to be really trying to play on that moving forward as well, as part of their, PR campaign, but also a marketing and sales strategy. And I guess we'll see if that's effective for them.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for both Ford and General Motors will be holding on to their buyers to convince people to continue buying their vehicles. And you have to remember that at this point in time, the Detroit companies and the import companies started to split the market 50-50 about 10 to 15 years ago. So right around 2010 was when the market split in half from Detroit vehicles and import vehicles, or import nameplates, because the imports are built in places like Ohio and Kentucky and elsewhere. And so you can't assume that your buyers will automatically be your buyers forever, because there's import nameplates are out there. I don't think an F-Series is matched by any of the Japanese manufacturers, but an SUV might. And certainly the Detroit companies are not building very many car models anymore. I did an article for the Boston Globe last year, and I think we were down to 8 cars.
Yeah.
Most of the cars in this country are coming from import nameplates. So that's another consideration. Does everybody go buy a pickup or an SUV, or are there still people who would like to buy a car? And there are some.
Yeah, there are. There are indeed. All right. So the white paper that you mentioned is to come. How do people follow Micheline Maynard, your work for all of the various things, and this Substack? There are some people I'm learning still, but Substack, what is it? How do they find you? And what do they get when they find you on Substack?
Okay. So let me explain, first of all, for people who aren't familiar with it, what Substack is. So there are a lot of writers and video producers and audio producers and photographers and others in this country that don't work for major news organizations. When I was coming up in college and when you were coming up in college, you went to work for somebody. So I went to work for big newspapers, and you went to work for WJR and then WXYZ TV. We don't necessarily have to do that anymore to have our voices and our faces heard and seen. We can go to a place like Substack, and it's a content platform. And it used to just be essays. And then they moved into photography, and now they're heavily into live video, and they have a stream that you can read every single day if you want to get little updates from the people that you follow. And so I have two publications on there, but I think the one that people will be interested in hearing about is called Intersection: Everything That Moves. And so I publish essays at least once a week and then updates on automotive and transportation news. And I started it in 2023 because that was the 20th anniversary of my book, The End of Detroit: How the Big Three Lost Their Grip on the American Car Market. And I wanted to update what had happened over the last 20 years because, we had the bankruptcies.
Right.
And we've had this emergence of big vehicles, and we've had the emergence of electric vehicles, and then we had the pandemic. And I wanted to just kind of walk people through what had happened since the book came out in 2003. So the first thing that I offered was, and it's still available to our paid subscribers, people who are willing to pay $30 for a year, which is the same price as a book. They got an ebook that updated The End of Detroit. And now, coming up in May, I'm going to publish a white paper on the future of the auto industry. And by a white paper, I mean about 10 pages of thoughts. And that will also be available to people who become paid subscribers. And essentially, I am trying to communicate directly with people who are interested in this topic. My focus is on primarily the car industry, but also other parts of transportation and other things I think might affect the auto industry in general. And it's just essentially an opportunity for me to speak directly to people who are interested in this topic. And so I appreciate it if people would like to sign up and get a paid subscription. You can sign up for free, and then you'll get like a little sample every so often of things that I'm writing about. But the really nice things, first of all, you're supporting my writing,
Right.
but also you would get the ebook and then eventually the white paper, and then I'll have other special things for people who would like to take out a paid subscription.
Well, having read your work for years and years, I can attest to the quality of the work and the insights that you provide, and that anyone interested in this topic would benefit from continuing to read your great work. So, Micki, we
Thank you.
wish you the best with that, and I want to thank you for your time here today to discuss this very important issue, and would like to invite you back in the future as well. We'll continue to look at this and hopefully follow up as well.
Absolutely. This is going to be a crazy year, and I'm more than happy to come back and help people understand what's happening.
Excellent. Thank you. Micki Maynard, author, journalist, educator, joining us on this episode of the Dave LewAllen Podcast. As always, thanks to our producer-director, Josh Bowron, but mostly to you for watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you go for your favorite podcasts. And tell a friend as well. Share this episode because it is an important topic today. Until next time, again, thanks for watching and listening. Stay safe. Be kind. The Dave LewAllen Podcast is sponsored by Sherm's Candy, a Michigan-based company that specializes in awesome tasting candy that's in the shape of Michigan.